Today we're going to be talking about friction. What is friction? Well, a good example is when you're playing poker and have a terrible hand, so you fold and throw the cards. However, they don't slide across the table indefinitely. This is because the forward velocity is decreasing and turning into heat while it collides with the table as well as with the air. Although in this case, the air is very minimally affecting the cards because they're playing cards on their side. Where's the air pushing them? But the reason something larger like a bullet comes to a point is so that less friction can act on it during its flight. You know what else has friction? Guns when you slide them across the floor. Perfect segue, Sean. Good work. My experiment was to take two guns, more specifically the M1911 and the M4A1, both loaded and unloaded in a bunch of different games, to find how far they slid and how long until they stopped sliding, to test the differences between different games and different game engines, and how they determine friction. And when I say a lot of games, I do mean a lot of games. So after I did all three tests where I slid the gun across the ground and then put into this really well-made table to do the calculations for me, it's a very pretty table. Wonder who made that. Hey, it was me. It took like 2 hours to get the functions to work. Then I used my editing software to precisely check how long each gun slid for. Yeah, good enough. In conclusion, there were 3 sets of data that I was able to gather from this experiment. 1, comparing different guns in the same game. 2, comparing the same guns in different games. And 3, seeing the difference between loaded and unloaded guns in the same game. As for comparing different guns in the same game, in Pavlov, the M4 slid further and took longer to stop sliding, but it was proportionate to the M1911. In Hotdogs, Horseshoes, and Handgrenades, the guns slid the exact same time as each other, but covered different distances. In Onward, the M4 slid a lot further, but both slid for around the same amount of time. In Boneworks, the guns slid the exact same distance, and for almost the same amount of time. In Zero Caliber, the M4 slid less distance and less time than the M1911, and in Out of Ammo, the gun just barely slid whatsoever. As for comparing the same guns in different games, for the M4, Pavlov and Zero Caliber got the furthest distances, though Zero Caliber slid for the longest time. Zero Caliber, Boneworks, and Onward had all approximately proportionate distance to time sliding. And Hotdogs slid the least distance and shortest of most, though, yet again, Out of Ammo was very far below all the other games, as it barely slides whatsoever. For the 1911, the Zero Caliber slid much further than Pavlov, but Pavlov's still a strong second, though it didn't slide quite as long as Boneworks. Boneworks and Onward were about proportionate, but Hotdogs and Boneworks were the closest in terms of distance. For seeing the difference between loaded and unloaded guns in the same game, Pavlov had a small to medium inconsistent change in distance and no change in slide time. In Hotdogs, there was no to a small increase in distance and very low inconsistent change in slide time. In Onward, there was no to a medium increase in distance and no to a very little decrease in slide time. In Boneworks, there was a medium inconsistent distance and a small inconsistent change in time. In Zero Caliber, there was a small or medium decrease in distance and medium to no decrease in slide time. And in Out of Ammo, there was no discernible difference. What we have learned is that in each of the individual games, it was completely random if the M4 would slide further than the M1911, but in some of the cases, it would just be about the same. The distance slid and time slid varied most of the time for the same gun across games, but the loading versus unloading of each gun either changed more than it probably should have in one or both directions, or did absolutely nothing at all. That I'm about 90% certain the floors in Zero Caliber are either made of ice or waxed by that one guy I keep seeing on my YouTube Shorts feed. That Into the Radius doesn't have the shooting range it used to where you get all the guns, and it also doesn't have a 1911. That it's terribly annoying to slide guns in VR and nearly impossible to do consistently. Whoa. Oh yeah, and then I'm very easily distracted. How did that hurt me? Also, don't tell the gun people that I definitely did not substitute an M16 for an M4 in both Onward and Boneworks, as I would never commit a sin that bad. 'Cause to them, it's like worse than adultery.